Camille had driven 2 hours from Denver to deliver a single sentence. The black man at the fence did not look up when the Range Rover stopped. He kept working, pulling a warped board loose from the gate, checking the grain, setting it aside. His flannel was dusty. His hands were certain. She stepped out. Gravel crunched beneath her shoes. "My father said you needed a wife." He went still. He set the board down. He turned, unhurried, like a man who had not been surprised by anything in years. Then he looked at her and said 4 words. She had no answer for them. Stellan Vore had arrived in Ridgeway on a Thursday in October of 2020, with everything that still mattered loaded into the bed of a Ford Ranger. Willa, his 9-year-old daughter, was asleep in the passenger seat, her head against the glass, one sock half off. He did not wake her when they crossed the county line. He did not look back at Denver either. There was nothing behind him he needed to see again. The farm had belonged to his late wife's father, a man named Gus, who had worked the land for 31 years and died of a stroke in the spring of 2017, leaving the property to his only daughter. She had never wanted to sell it. She had also never wanted to move back to Colorado. So it sat, the fence posts slowly leaning, the chufa going to seed, the barn roof patching itself with rust. For 3 years it waited. Then Gus's daughter died too, and the farm passed to her husband, who drove out on a Thursday in October with a 9-year-old asleep in the front seat and no particular plan beyond getting through the next season. Stellan fixed the roof first, then the fencing along the north edge, then the water line to the barn, which had cracked somewhere underground and required 3 days of digging by hand. He did not hire anyone. The work took most of the winter, and he was grateful for that. Grateful for the cold. Grateful for the ache in his shoulders at the end of each day. Grateful that Ridgeway was a town where people nodded instead of asking questions, where the cashier at the feed store said good morning the same way she said it to everyone, and the diner cook on Main Street did not glance twice when a black man in muddy boots sat at the counter and ordered eggs. There were moments, of course, when he felt the older weather. A truck, slowing at an intersection a beat longer than necessary. A clerk at the hardware store asking twice whether he was sure about the size of the bit he was buying. He had learned long ago to register these moments without absorbing them. He paid in cash. He did not explain. He moved on. That first night in the farmhouse, he sat with Willa at the kitchen table while a kettle hissed on the stove. The light overhead was old and yellow. The walls smelled faintly of wood smoke and thyme. Willa watched him pour cocoa into 2 chipped mugs without saying anything. She had learned, somewhere over the past 2 years, that her father did not need to be asked questions in order to answer the ones that mattered. He carried her up the stairs when her eyes went heavy. He tucked her in under a quilt that had belonged to her grandmother, in a room that smelled like cedar. He sat on the edge of the bed for a minute, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. "From here on out," he said, his voice low and even, "we are not packing anything else into the truck. This is the place. You hear me?" Willa did not ask him to explain. She did not ask about Denver, or the house they had left, or the woman whose photograph was wrapped in tissue paper at the bottom of his duffel. She just held onto his hand until her breathing slowed, and then she let it go. He stood in the hallway afterward and listened to the wind move through the cottonwoods. Raymond Hart had moved in next door 11 months before Stellan arrived. He was 70 years old, recently retired, and he had bought the adjacent property because he wanted to be somewhere the sky was not blocked by buildings. He had built something once, something significant, and now he wanted to spend his mornings looking at the Cimarron Range. He had not expected a neighbor. Their first meeting happened because one of Raymond's 2 black Angus cows walked through a gap in the fence on a Wednesday afternoon and found its way to the water trough behind Stellan's barn. Stellan walked the animal back without saying much. Raymond said, "Thank you." That was the extent of it. The following Friday, Raymond showed up at the fence with 2 mugs of coffee. Stellan accepted one without comment. They stood there for about 20 minutes, watching the light move across the peaks. Raymond left when the coffee was gone. He came back the next Friday, and the one after that. By March, it had become a ritual that neither of them had named. Raymond brought the coffee. Stellan was always already at the fence. They did not talk about what they had done before, who they had been, where they were going. Raymond noticed, early on, that Stellan never volunteered explanations for anything, not for the quality of his fencing, not for the precision of his drainage work, not for the way he read a topographic map the way other men read a newspaper. Raymond recognized that kind of quiet. He had worn it himself, years ago when he had been becoming someone different than who he had been. He had walked away from a partnership track in Denver at 35 with $18,000 and no guarantees, and he remembered exactly what it had felt like to refuse to explain that choice to anyone, including himself. He watched Stellan over the months. He watched the way the man calculated a roof pitch in his head while leaning against a post. He watched him correct, gently, a contractor's estimate for a culvert by what turned out to be almost 40%. He watched him decline an invitation to join the volunteer board at the local library with a polite, complete sentence that revealed exactly nothing about what he might bring to it. One evening in February, after Stellan had gone back inside and the coffee mugs sat empty on a fence post, Raymond walked back to his own house and sat down at his desk. He pulled up the contacts on his phone, scrolled to a name he had not dialed in almost 6 years, and pressed call. "Marcus," he said, when the other man answered. "I need you to tell me whether you know anyone by the name of Vor." There was a long pause on the other end. "Where are you hearing that name?" "He's living next to me. Works the land. Quiet. Has a little girl. Daughter named Willa?" "Yes." Another pause. Longer this time. "I am not going to tell you anything he hasn't told you, Ray. He has earned his quiet. You can take that as an answer." Raymond did not press. He thanked Marcus and hung up. He sat at the desk for a while afterward, looking out the window at the dark shape of the barn across the property line. He had been a lawyer long enough to know how to read a silence. The man next door had been someone, somewhere, and had chosen to stop being that person. The choice had been deliberate, and it had cost him something Raymond could not see from here. In the morning, Raymond made coffee in 2 mugs and carried them out to the fence. Camille Hart was 37 years old and ran a company with 14 locations and 460 employees, and she managed all of it with a precision that left very little room for the unexpected. She drove up from Denver once a month, usually on a Saturday, in a black Range Rover, stayed 2 nights, helped her father with whatever he could not manage alone, and drove back. The visits had a rhythm. She liked rhythms. She had seen the man next door before she had been formally told he existed. On her 3rd or 4th visit, she had been standing at her father's kitchen window while the coffee brewed, watching someone replace fence posts in the field, across the way. Methodical, unhurried, not the pace of someone being paid by the hour. Without thinking about it, she had filed him into a category: laborer, rural, uncomplicated. She had moved on to her coffee and her phone and the morning's emails. She had not looked at his face. She had not noted his color. She had simply slotted him into a shape that did not require her attention, and she had felt nothing about the slotting, which is how the most efficient versions of these slottings always feel. Her father mentioned him in passing a few times after that. The neighbor, the man with the daughter, the one who could read a topographic map. Then, one evening in late autumn, she and Raymond were sitting on the porch after dinner. The air was sharp. The sky over the Cimarron Range was that particular blue that only happens for about 20 minutes, between sunset and full dark. Raymond looked out toward the fence line, and he said something quiet that Camille either heard wrong or heard right and simply did not understand. She asked him to repeat it. He did not. She went to bed thinking about it. In the morning, she got into her car and drove next door. She told herself she had a legitimate reason for being there. Heart Wellness Group owned a parcel of land, 3.4 acres, acquired in 2019 as part of a larger transaction that had since been restructured. The parcel sat directly adjacent to Raymond's property, which put it adjacent to Stellan's as well. There were easement questions that had never been formally resolved, access rights along the old irrigation ditch, maintenance responsibilities for the shared fence line. She was a CEO. These were operational matters. It made sense to address them directly. That was what she told herself. She parked on the gravel turnout outside his gate, smoothed her jacket, and walked up to the house in heels that were wrong for the terrain. She had rehearsed her opening sentence in the car. She had also rehearsed, beneath the sentence, the version of him she expected to find, a weathered farmer in a denim jacket. Late 50s, perhaps. hands like cracked leather, the kind of figure who would be quietly flattered to be addressed by a CEO in a tailored coat. She had not interrogated the picture. She had carried it the entire drive west, the way a person carries the weather report in the back of her mind. He opened the door before she knocked. She caught herself, just barely. She had built a picture in her head, somewhere between her father's porch and his driveway, of who would be standing on the other side of that door. The picture had been wrong in almost every particular. She had imagined an older man, maybe, or a stooped one. She had not imagined this. She had not imagined a black man near her own age, tall and steady, with sawdust on the cuff of his shirt, and a gaze that read her in the time it took her to register that he was reading her. He was not rude about it. He simply noted her, the way a person notes weather. There was no surprise in his face, and no welcome either. There was only a kind of patient stillness, the same stillness her father had described from the fence line, and Camille felt, for one disorienting half-second, the entire architecture of her assumptions about the morning collapse and resettle around her. She said her name. She said why she had come. He stepped aside and let her in. Stellan did not invite her further into the house. He gestured her toward the porch instead. He went inside and came back with 2 folding chairs and a flat wooden board, and he set it all up as a table without being asked. Then he went back inside again and came out with a tube of rolled maps. He spread the topographic survey across the board and weighted the corners with stones he pulled from his coat pocket. The stones were river smooth. Camille noticed, distantly, that he had picked them up at some point for exactly this kind of purpose. The easement runs along this line, he said, tracing it with a blunt finger. Original filing was 1983. It has been referenced in every subsequent transfer. Here, here, and here. He indicated 3 points on the survey without hesitating. The maintenance responsibility is split at the 3rd post from the north marker. Your company's side of the line. Your company's obligation. Camille looked at the map. Then she looked at him. You pulled the filing history. I looked it up. That is not a county assessor search. That is a title chain. He did not answer. You studied this, she said. He picked up one of the cornerstones and turned it over in his hand. Some things you don't forget. Her phone buzzed on the board between them. She glanced at the screen. Priscilla Ewan, her company's general counsel, calling from Denver. She picked up. I am in Ridgeway, Camille said. Can I call you back in an hour? There was a pause on the other end. Not long. Half a breath. Ridgeway? Priscilla said, and something shifted, almost imperceptibly in her voice. Of course, she added. Whenever you are ready. Camille hung up. She set the phone down. She did not notice the pause. She did not notice the way Priscilla's tone had flattened for just that half-second. The way a person's voice goes flat when they recognize something they were not expecting. Across the table, Stellan was already gathering the maps. He rolled them with the same efficiency he had unrolled them, secured them with a rubber band, and handed Camille an annotated copy he had made on a separate sheet. The boundary line highlighted, the easement flagged, the maintenance split marked with a small penciled arrow. She took it. She read it. There was nothing on the page that required further conversation. He had answered every question she might have asked, in writing, in advance. She looked up at him. My father said something the other night, she said. About you. He said you needed a wife. I came over here this morning because I wanted to know what he meant. Stellan did not look at her. He was focused on returning the rolled maps to their cardboard tube. His hands were unhurried. The morning light caught the side of his jaw, the gray at his temple, the small old scar above his left eyebrow that she had not noticed until this moment. Your father wasn't wrong about me needing a wife, he said. He was wrong about what that means. He set the tube down on the porch boards. A man like me, in a place like this, with a child like Willa, people expect a shape, a woman in the kitchen, a second income, a second voice at the parent-teacher conference. Your father is old enough to remember when that shape was the whole world. He sees me alone out here, and he reaches for the only word he has for what I am doing without one. He looked at her finally. Direct, mild. I do not need a wife. I need to keep my word to my daughter. Those are not the same sentence. He went inside. The screen door closed behind him without a sound. Camille sat at the wooden board in the morning light with the annotated survey in her hands and the Cimarron Range at the edge of her vision, and she turned the sentence over in her mind the way he had turned that stone. She could not find the loose edge of it. She could not find where to pull. Doran Keswick found out about the second visit on a Tuesday. Rural towns talked. A Range Rover with Denver plates at the same farm twice in 8 days was the kind of detail that moved through Ridgeway without anyone intending it to. By Tuesday afternoon, it had reached the desk of a man who had a standing arrangement with the bookkeeper at the Ridgeway feed store, who happened to be the cousin of his wife's hairdresser. Keswick was 61. He had been Heart Wellness Group's chief operating officer for 6 years. He had joined the board 14 months before Camille's father, Raymond, had stepped down. He called a private research firm in Colorado Springs he had used before and gave them a name, Stellenvor. What came back 2 days later was a gap. The name appeared in Colorado, records going back to birth, and then, after 2020, almost nothing. No business registrations, no professional filings, no civic board memberships, no conference appearances, a property deed for the Ridgeway farm, a truck registration, a library card. Keswick read the report twice. He sat with it for an afternoon. When a man that age had that kind of professional void, it meant one of two things. He had failed spectacularly and retreated, or he had succeeded spectacularly and disappeared on purpose. The first type was harmless. The second was leverage. He authorized a deeper pull, and he set the cost against the discretionary account he had managed, without board oversight for 6 years. On the phone with the lead investigator, he was specific. "I want criminal records," he said. "Sealed if you can get them. Civil judgments. Anything with a court file." He paused. African-American male, mid-30s to early 40s, unverified background, currently advising the CEO of a major Colorado healthcare company. "I want to know what we are dealing with." The investigator was a 30-year veteran of his field. He registered the order of the descriptors. He registered the cross-check request. He did not comment. He had learned, over those 30 years, that the easiest way to lose a client was to point out what the client did not want pointed out. He took the assignment and hung up. Keswick was not, by his own measure, a racist. He had sat through 3 diversity training sessions at the company in the past 5 years. He had signed off on the board's most recent inclusion statement. He understood, when pressed, that none of those things prevented a man in his chair from doing what he was doing now. He simply chose not to dwell on the distinction. That evening, Keswick met his personal attorney for a drink in the back booth of a steakhouse on 17th Street. "She has been driving to Ridgeway," he said, "twice in 8 days. She is taking advice from somebody we cannot put a name to." The attorney swirled his bourbon. "She has been visiting her father. Her father lives in Ridgeway. She is not driving 2 hours each way to discuss her father's blood pressure. She is at the property next door. She has been there twice. She brought paperwork the second time." What kind of paperwork? Easement survey, boundary annotation, done by hand. The kind of work an associate at a Denver firm would charge $900 for. The attorney looked at him over the rim of his glass. "Doran, what exactly are you afraid of?" Keswick smiled, briefly, without warmth. "I am afraid that the board will hear, in 6 weeks, that the CEO of this company has been making strategic decisions based on the counsel of a man none of them have heard of. I am afraid they will not understand why. And I am afraid that, by the time they ask the question, the answer will not be one I can frame for them." He set his glass down. "I need to get ahead of it. I need to be the one who tells the board who this man is. I need to be the one who shapes how they see him." The attorney nodded slowly. He did not ask the obvious question. He understood, by then, which questions Doran Keswick did not appreciate being asked. Camille drove back to Ridgeway on Friday, with the annotated survey in her bag, and a reason she had rehearsed twice on the way out of Denver. She had noticed an error in the parcel boundary notation. She wanted to confirm it against the original. The reason was not strong. She did not examine it closely. She let herself believe it, and drove the 2 hours west without the radio on. Stellan was on the north fence when she arrived, a section that ran along the dry creek bed where the posts had been sinking for years in the soft bank. She parked at the gate and walked out to him in heels that were, again, wrong for the terrain. He did not comment on that. They went along the fence line together. He pointed out where the creek bed had shifted 16 inches east over the past decade, taking a thin strip of soil with it and undercutting 3 of the posts. He had already staked the new line. He would reset the posts before the ground froze. Most people only see what is flowering, he said, crouching to press his thumb into the soft earth near a post base. They miss what is moving underneath. She was not sure if he was talking about the fence. She asked about his wife without planning to. The question came out while she was looking at the mountains rather than at him, which was probably why she let herself ask it. He did not break stride. She was brilliant, he said. She made everything look easy, including leaving. He said it without bitterness. The way a person states a fact about weather. It had happened. It was part of the landscape now. Camille did not respond. There was nothing to say that would not have been smaller than the silence he offered instead. They were almost back at the truck when the back door of the farmhouse opened, and Willa came out carrying a plate covered in a dish towel. She was 9 years old and moved with the deliberate calm of a child who had learned to read rooms early. She saw Camille and stopped, assessed her without expression for a full 3 seconds, then continued to her father and held out the plate. "Ham and cheddar," she said. "I made 2. Stellan took 1/2. He looked at Camille with a brief, neutral expression that was, if she was reading it correctly, an offer. She took the other half. Willa nodded once, as if confirming something, and went back inside. They stood at the truck and ate. The bread was fresh. The cheese was sharp. Stellan had a way of eating a sandwich that suggested he had once forgotten what hunger felt like and had decided never to take a meal for granted again. He did not speak while he ate. Neither did she. When they were finished, she handed him back the napkin and thanked him. He nodded. "She likes you," he said. "She wouldn't have brought 2 if she didn't." It was the first thing he had said about Willa since Camille had arrived, and the first thing he had said all day that was not strictly informational. Camille felt it land somewhere behind her sternum. "How can she tell?" she asked. "She does not know me." Stellan looked toward the house. "She has had a year of watching me decide who comes onto the porch and who does not. She has learned to read what I read. That is all." He walked her to the gate. In the car, before she started the engine, Camille sat for a long time looking at the dark farmhouse windows. The light in the kitchen was the last to go out. She had eaten the sandwich. She had not meant to stay that long. She had not meant to be seen by his daughter at all. And she could not have explained, if asked, what she was waiting for as she watched that last window go dark. She started the car and drove east into the dusk. The board meeting happened on a Wednesday, 10 days before the Saturday coffee. Keswick presented the VantageMed acquisition with clean slides and conservative projections. The offer valued Heart Wellness Group at $340 million, with VantageMed taking controlling interest after 18 months, and Camille retained as a figurehead CEO for no less than 3 years. The language around that last part was careful. Keswick had chosen the words thoughtfully. She did not say yes. She said she needed more time. After the room cleared, Priscilla Ewan appeared at her elbow in the corridor. Priscilla was 48, a graduate of Yale Law, and she had been Heart Wellness's general counsel for 11 years. Raymond had hired her 2 months before he retired. She was the kind of attorney who did not waste a sentence in either direction. "There is something you should look at," she said, "before you form a position. The trust provisions in the original charter, the ones your father included in 2003. Section 9. I know what is in the charter." Priscilla looked at her for a moment. "Read it again," she said. Then she walked away. Camille spent an hour that evening with Section 9 on her screen. The language was dense and specific. She was not sure she understood all of it. She was not sure Keswick did not. She closed her laptop after midnight and lay in the dark, and for the first time in a year, she could not parse what she was feeling well enough to name it. Saturday morning, the True Grit Cafe on Main Street was half full when she arrived. Stellan was already there. Corner table, window facing Main Street, work boots that were as promised in the brief text exchange earlier in the week. Not clean. 2 cups of black coffee on the table, which he had ordered without knowing what she drank, and he had been right, and he did not mention it. They talked for over an hour. Not about the company at first, about Willa's growing fixation with agricultural engineering textbooks she was checking out of the Ridgeway library, 3 at a time, and reading at the kitchen table, with a notebook open beside them, about the particular silence of Ridgeway in December, when the summer people left and the town went back to being itself, about Raymond's 3 failed batches of goat cheese, which had ended with him standing at the kitchen sink at midnight, asking the cheesecloth what he had done to deserve this. Camille found herself laughing. Twice. Both times surprised her. Then Stellan asked without preamble, "What keeps you up at night about the company?" She had been asked versions of this in board meetings, on investor calls, on the intake forms for executive coaching retreats she had attended and found mostly useless. She had a practiced answer. It was careful and calibrated and true about nothing. She did not give it. "Someone is trying to sell something my father built," she said, "and call it growth." He did not nod along. He did not reframe it or offer a perspective. He just let the sentence be there. Then he reached for the coffee pot and refilled her cup. That was all, and somehow it was enough. Enough to make her keep talking for the next several minutes about what her father had actually built, about the way he had started in a strip mall in Fort Collins with $18,000, and her mother standing in the parking lot saying, "What do you need me to carry?" About the way he had said, every year, at every staff meeting, that the only thing they sold was time. Time for people to get well, and you could not put that on a balance sheet and call it a number. She talked. Stellan listened. Outside the window, a dog crossed Main Street and disappeared between 2 parked trucks. On the sidewalk afterward, she stood in the cold before getting into her car. The second investigative report on Stellan Vore arrived in Keswick's inbox on a Monday and contained the same absence as the first. No professional association memberships, no conference appearances, no published commentary, no former colleagues who tagged him anywhere public. The firm in Colorado Springs noted that this level of deliberate profile reduction was unusual and typically required legal counsel to achieve. Keswick read the note twice. The sealed records cross-check had come back empty. There was nothing to find because there was nothing to find. The man had not been hiding from the law. He had been hiding from his own name. Keswick had his attorney draft a memo to the full board, arguing that the trust provision Priscilla had referenced was legally dormant, that Colorado statute established a 20-year activation window, and that a provision unreferenced in board minutes since 2003 had effectively lapsed. The memo cited 3 cases. Keswick circulated it the day before Camille was scheduled to review the charter with outside counsel. She read it. Then she read the charter again. The language was ambiguous enough that she genuinely could not tell who was right. On Friday evening, she drove to Ridgeway. Not for any stated reason. She told herself she was checking on her father, which was partly true. She stopped at the weekend farmers market on Main Street, which was winding down, the vendors packing their tables, and she was looking at a bin of late-season apples when a small voice spoke at her elbow. "Those are Fuji's," Willa said. "They are okay. The Honeycrisps are better." Camille looked down. The little girl pointed to the next table over. They moved together. Camille bought a bag. Willa told her that the best way to store them was stem-side down in a cool, dark place, which her father had explained to her in September. "He explains a lot of things," Camille said. Willa considered this. "He knows a lot of things," she said, the distinction apparently important. Across the market, Stellan had seen them. He stood in the middle of the aisle between 2 tables of winter squash, a canvas bag over one shoulder, and he did not close the distance. He watched his daughter standing comfortably beside Camille, pointing at apples. He stayed where he was until they looked up, and Willa waved him over. That evening, alone at the kitchen table after Willa was in bed, he made a phone call. The number he dialed had a Denver area code, and it rang 4 times before the man on the other end picked up. "I need to ask you about something," Stellan said. "I figured you would call eventually," the man said. Stellan asked about Heart Wellness Group, about the charter provisions from 2003, about the specific legal argument Keswick's attorney had constructed, and about a name, Doran Keswick. The man on the other end knew 2 of these 4 things and took 20 minutes to work through the third. "The provision does not lapse," he said finally. The Colorado case Keswick is citing was reversed on appeal in 2016. The reversal is buried. You would have to know to look for it. Stellan said nothing for a moment. "Are you going to tell her who you are?" the man asked. "Not tonight." On Saturday morning, before 7, he drove the 2 hours to Denver for the first time in 4 years. He parked 2 blocks from the Heart Wellness building on 17th Street. He went in through the main entrance. He left a manila envelope with the front desk attendant. Inside was a 2-page analysis he had written by hand the night before. The charter provision language broken down section by section. The Keswick memo addressed point by point. The reversed Colorado case cited with its full docket number. No signature, no name, only a handwritten note at the top. "The provision does not expire. Ask Keswick what year he joined the board." He drove back to Ridgeway. He did not call. He did not wait. Camille read the envelope's contents at her desk at 8:45. She read it twice. She thought about the man at the fence 3 weeks ago who had said 4 words. She still had not entirely answered. She confirmed Keswick's board start date in the corporate records that afternoon. 2019, 14 months after her father had quietly extended the charter provision during a routine annual filing without entering it into the board minutes. Because it was a protective measure he hoped he would never need, Keswick had joined knowing the provision existed. He had built the entire VantageMed proposal around the assumption that Camille would never find it. She went to his office at 4. She did not bring notes. "You knew about the trust provision when you joined the board," she said. "Camille, the memo addresses the provision. It is legally dormant. 2 senior partners signed off. The Colorado case you cited was reversed on appeal." 2016. A beat. Very brief. Then his expression hardened. "You have been driving to a farm in Ridgeway to take advice from a man who shovels hay. A man whose background no one on this board has been able to verify. Is that how we are making decisions now? Are we letting some black laborer with a library card and a hand-drawn map run a $400 million company?" The sentence landed in the room like a dropped glass. He realized, immediately, that he had let something slip. He tried to recover. Camille raised one hand and stopped him. "No," she said quietly. "We are making decisions based on a document your attorney misrepresented to this board. And we will be discussing the rest of what you just said in a different room, with different people." She went directly to Priscilla's office. Priscilla was waiting. On the desk, the minutes from an internal leadership meeting in the spring of 2022, 5th paragraph. "A recommendation, attributed to Doran Keswick with 3 co-signing signatures, that the incoming CEO not be briefed on the charter provision." Camille read it twice. The room was quiet. At 6:30, she drove west. Not toward downtown. Not toward her father. Toward the farm. 2 hours and 50 minutes without the radio. The sky went from orange to purple to black. When she turned onto the gravel road, the only lights were the stars and the single lamp on his porch. He was on the porch steps in the dark, the way someone sits when the day has been long enough that the quiet outside matches the quiet inside. She parked. She crossed the yard and stopped in front of him. "Who are you?" He was still for a moment. The lamp above him hummed faintly. "Someone who read the same kind of agreement 12 years ago," he said, and did not catch it in time. He told her then, not everything, not all at once, but enough. Hartwell Capital, Deputy CFO, a restructuring proposal misrepresented to investors. He had seen the edges and had not pressed. Because he had been 30 and trusted the men above him, the structure collapsed 2 years later. Several people lost everything. His wife had been watching it from inside her own firm. She had flagged it through channels. She had been quietly moved to a different division. She was driving home from a deposition when she died. He did not draw a line between those things. He did not need to. "I left Denver," he said, "because I did not want to be the person who saw things clearly and still let them happen. I had already been that person once, and I wanted to leave the rooms where I had to prove twice what other men in those rooms only had to say once. I was tired." Camille sat down on the bottom step. not close. Just there. Neither of them said anything else for a while. The emergency board meeting was called for a Thursday. Camille presented the 2022 internal document first. She read the relevant paragraph aloud without commentary and set it in the center of the table. The room was quiet. 2 of the 3 board members who had signed it asked to speak with their attorneys before continuing. The third resigned on the spot, sliding her board credentials across the table and leaving without a word. The other 2 submitted their resignations by end of business. That left 7 voting members. The motion to reject VantageMed was raised by Francis Alcott, the board's longest-serving independent member. The vote was 7-2. Keswick's allies were the holdouts. Everyone in the room understood that their position had become untenable. Keswick was suspended pending the independent audit that the remaining board voted to authorize. The auditors would have access to the discretionary accounts he had managed without oversight for 6 years. That evening, Camille drove to Ridgeway. Through the kitchen window, she could see the warm rectangle of indoor light. Stellan at the counter, Willa at the table, a book propped against a glass of water. She stood at the gate for a moment. The kitchen light shifted. Stellan had heard the gravel. He came out onto the porch with a folding chair under his arm and set it open beside his own. She walked up. She sat. Willa came out 15 minutes later with her book and her glass of water and settled on the steps below them as if this were ordinary, as if there had always been 3 chairs. The sky above Ridgeway was full of stars, more than she ever saw from Denver. The Cimarron Range was a dark shape to the south. No one explained anything. No one needed to. 3 months later, the audit findings were referred to the Colorado Attorney General's office. Priscilla was confirmed as Chief Operating Officer. One Thursday morning, she placed a single document on Camille's desk. A real estate transfer. Stellan Vore had purchased the 3.4-acre parcel at market rate. He had not negotiated. On a Friday afternoon in late March, the sun still an hour above the western ridge, Camille pulled onto the gravel road. She walked out to the shared boundary line, the old fence that ran between what had been 2 properties and was now something slightly different. Stellan was already there. They stood beside each other. The Cimarrons were pale orange in the lowering light. Behind them, Willa trotted toward Raymond's porch with a folded sheet of paper that turned out to be a hand-drawn map of the south pasture. Raymond watched from his chair and did not get up. No one said anything that needed to be said. There were just 2 people standing at a fence they no longer needed to negotiate over, in the last of a Friday's light, and neither of them had been looking. That was the only reason they found each other.